Imagine, for a moment, that you are drifting away from everything you've ever known. The earth grows smaller behind you, a blue marble suspended in an ocean of darkness. You are moving through space now, untethered, unaging, eternal. But before we journey to the distant stars, before we contemplate the vast cosmic scales that await us, let us pause here, in this first moment of departure. Let us consider what it truly means to leave the only world you have ever known. The first thing you would notice, perhaps even before the majesty of the view, is that you would still need oxygen. This might seem obvious, even mundane, but it is the most fundamental truth of your journey. Your lungs would still expand and contract, seeking that precious gas that has sustained every breath you have ever taken. Without a suit, without a ship, you would have only moments before unconsciousness. But in our thought experiment, you are somehow sustained, somehow breathing, carried forward by an impossible gift. Still, the need remains. Your body would remember Earth in every breath, a biological tether stretching across the void, reminding you that you are, at your core, a creature born of air and water and soil. As you drift further, you would encounter the second truth of space: complete and utter silence. Not the silence of a quiet room at night, where you can still hear the settling of a house or the distant hum of machinery. Not even the silence of deep wilderness, where wind whispers through trees and insects hum in the darkness. This would be absolute silence, a silence so profound it has no earthly equivalent. Space has no medium for sound to travel through, no air molecules to vibrate and carry waves to your ears. You could witness an explosion of a star, the collision of worlds, the birth of galaxies, and you would hear nothing at all. Just silence. Eternal, unbroken silence. It is a quiet that would, at first, feel peaceful, meditative even. But gradually, you might begin to feel its weight, this absence of all acoustic sensation, this void where sound should be. And within that silence, you would discover something even stranger. You would never hear your own voice again. On Earth, when you speak, you hear yourself through two pathways. Through the air, as sound waves travel from your mouth to your ears, and through the bones of your skull, as vibrations pass directly through your jaw and bone to your inner ear. In space, that first pathway vanishes entirely. If you tried to speak, you might feel your vocal cords vibrate, you might sense the movement of your lips and tongue, but you would hear nothing. Or rather, you would hear only the muffled, internal resonance conducted through your own skeleton, a ghost of your voice, hollow and strange. It would be as though you were speaking from inside a dream, where everything feels slightly wrong, slightly disconnected from reality. Your voice, that most personal and familiar sound, would become alien to you. As the silence settles around you like a blanket, you would notice the absence of something else you've experienced every day of your life. Wind, air pressure, the sensation of atmosphere against your skin. On Earth, you are constantly wrapped in a thin layer of air, pressing gently but persistently against every surface of your body. You feel it as a breeze on a summer day, as the rush of movement when you run, as the gentle pressure changes when you dive underwater or climb a mountain. It is so constant that you rarely notice it consciously. But in space, it would simply be gone. No breath of air would ever touch your face again. No gust would tousle your hair. No pressure would push against your skin. You would exist in perfect stillness, the vacuum of space touching you in a way that isn't quite touching at all. It is presence through absence, a sensation of nothingness that would feel, paradoxically, like something entirely new. Without atmosphere, you would also lose something you might not immediately think of: weather. You have lived your entire life under skies that change. Clouds gather and disperse. Rain falls. Snow drifts down in winter. The sun breaks through in golden shafts. Temperature rises and falls with the hours and seasons. Weather is the Earth's mood made visible, the planet's atmosphere in constant conversation with itself. In space, there is no weather. The sun shines or it doesn't, depending on whether something blocks it from your view. There is no rain because there is no water vapor in the vacuum to condense and fall. No snow, no fog, no morning dew. No thunder or lightning or rainbows. The sky would never be overcast because there would be no sky at all. Only the vast canvas of space itself, constant and unchanging except for the slow wheel of stars and the dance of distant celestial objects. You would drift through a realm where the concept of weather simply has no meaning. If you cried in this place, if emotion or memory brought tears to your eyes, those tears would behave in ways that would seem magical, impossible. On Earth, tears fall. Gravity pulls them down your cheeks in familiar tracks. But in space, in the absence of gravity's pull, your tears would not fall at all. Instead, they would gather at your eyes, clinging to the surface by surface tension alone, forming perfect spheres of salt water that would grow larger and larger until they either floated away or you wiped them aside. It is a small thing, perhaps, but profound in its strangeness. Even grief, even sorrow, even joy would manifest differently here. Your emotions would be the same, but their physical expression would be transformed by the alien physics of this place. You would also not feel cold the way you expect to. On Earth, we lose heat primarily through conduction and convection. Our warm bodies heat the air or water or ground touching us, and that heat is carried away. When you step outside on a winter day, the cold air draws heat from your skin rapidly. When you plunge into cool water, it steals warmth even faster. But in the vacuum of space, there is nothing to conduct heat away from you. Instead, you would lose heat only through radiation, the same way the Earth itself radiates heat into space, slowly, gradually. In darkness, away from the sun, you would eventually grow cold, but it would happen over hours, not seconds or minutes. You would cool like a stone left in shadow, steadily but not suddenly. And if the sun's light fell upon you, you would feel its radiation intensely, scorching heat on one side while the shaded side of your body grew steadily cooler. Temperature would become a strange patchwork across your skin, no longer the uniform sensation you've always known. Perhaps one of the most disorienting changes would be the complete loss of your sense of up and down. On Earth, gravity provides a constant reference. Down is always down, toward the center of the planet. Your inner ear contains tiny crystals floating in fluid, and gravity's pull on these crystals tells your brain which way is down, helping you maintain balance and orientation. But in the weightlessness of space, these crystals would float freely, signaling nothing, confused and confusing. There would be no up, no down, no right side up or upside down. You could orient yourself in any direction, and it would feel no different from any other. At first, this might cause profound disorientation, even nausea, as your brain struggles to make sense of contradictory signals. But eventually, perhaps you would adapt to this new reality, where direction is arbitrary, where you are the center of your own coordinate system, and all orientations are equally valid. You would never feel the ground again. Think about this for a moment. Every single day of your life, you have felt the solid earth beneath you, the floor under your feet, the chair supporting you, the bed cradling you as you sleep. Even astronauts on the International Space Station have walls and surfaces they can push against, anchor themselves to. But drifting alone through space, there would be nothing solid, nothing fixed, nothing to press against or stand upon. You would float in perfect suspension, neither rising nor falling, with no reference point but yourself. It is a kind of freedom humans have dreamed of for millennia, the freedom of flight, of weightlessness. But it is also a kind of isolation, a severance from the tactile certainty that comes from touching something solid and real. Finally, you would lose something you might not have considered: smell. Scent is carried to us by molecules floating through air, binding to receptors in our nose. The smell of coffee in the morning, of rain on dry soil, of flowers or smoke or the sea. All of these reach you through the medium of atmosphere. In the vacuum of space, there are no molecules to carry scent. Even if you somehow encountered a fragrant object, no particles would drift from it to your nose. Your sense of smell would become utterly useless, dormant, a sense without purpose. And in losing smell, you would also lose much of your sense of taste, which relies heavily on olfactory input. The experience of flavor would be reduced to the basic sensations detected by your tongue alone: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. The richness and complexity that makes food one of life's great pleasures would be stripped away, leaving only the simplified palate. These are the immediate realities of leaving Earth. Before the wonder, before the cosmic perspective, before the contemplation of infinity, there would be these losses, these absences, these strange new sensations. You would be the same person you have always been, with the same mind and memories and consciousness, but the world around you would have changed so completely that even your own body would feel different, unfamiliar, transformed by the simple act of leaving the planet that made you. And yet, as you drift there in the silence and the stillness, watching the earth recede behind you, you might feel something else too. A sense of profound transition. You have crossed a threshold that almost no human being has ever crossed. You have left not just a place, but a category of experience. Everything that comes next will be unlike anything that has come before. The journey is only beginning. Now that you have left Earth behind, now that you have felt the first strange absences of space settle around you, let us consider something even more fundamental: movement itself. On Earth, motion is something you understand intuitively. You walk, you run, you stop. You turn left or right. You climb up stairs and descend them. Every movement is deliberate, controlled, a response to your will. But here, drifting through the void, motion becomes something altogether different. Something ancient and Newtonian. Something that would slowly reshape your understanding of what it means to move through the universe. Your body would float forever in one direction. This is Newton's first law made manifest, made personal. An object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by an external force. On Earth, external forces are everywhere. Friction slows you down. Air resistance pushes back against you. Gravity pulls you toward the ground. Every step you take is immediately opposed by the world around you, so you must constantly apply force to keep moving. But in space, there is no friction, no air resistance, no ground to push against. If you were drifting in a particular direction when you left Earth, you would continue drifting in that direction, at that exact speed, forever. Not for minutes or hours or years, but forever, until something, somewhere, eventually exerts a force upon you. A passing asteroid, the gravity of a distant star, the thin wisps of interstellar gas accumulating over millions of years. But in the immediate experience, in the human timescale, you would simply move endlessly in one direction, unable to stop, unable to change course, a passenger to momentum itself. And as you drifted, something subtle would begin to happen. You would slowly spin without realizing it. Perhaps you pushed off from something as you departed, and that push was not perfectly centered on your body's center of mass. Perhaps you moved your arm, shifted your weight, made some tiny asymmetrical motion. Any of these would have imparted a slight rotation, so small you might not notice at first. But that rotation, like your forward motion, would continue forever. You might be spinning once every few minutes or once every hour, and the motion would be so gradual, so smooth, that your inner ear would not detect it. Your view would slowly rotate, the stars wheeling around you in a grand, lazy circle, and you might not even realize that it was you who was turning, not the universe. It would be like standing in the center of a slowly rotating room, where the acceleration is so gentle that your senses cannot distinguish it from stillness. You would become a tiny, tumbling moon, orbiting nothing, spinning for no reason other than that you once, briefly, were not perfectly still. You would never feel acceleration. This might seem contradictory at first. Surely, you think, if you are moving, you must have accelerated to get to that speed. And this is true. But the feeling of acceleration, the sensation of being pushed back into your seat when a car speeds up or thrown forward when it brakes, requires something to push against. It is the car seat pressing into your back, the seatbelt pulling across your chest, that creates the sensation. In space, with nothing to push against, you and everything around you would accelerate together if a force were applied. If you drifted into the gravitational field of a massive object, you would begin to speed up, falling faster and faster toward it. But you would feel nothing. No sensation of acceleration at all. You would be in free fall, and free fall feels exactly like floating, exactly like stillness. Astronauts in orbit experience this constantly. They are falling toward Earth at tremendous speeds, accelerating around the planet thousands of miles per hour, but they feel weightless, motionless, because they and their spacecraft are falling together. You would be the same. Speed would become something you could only know intellectually, by watching objects outside yourself grow closer or more distant, but never something you could feel in your bones. Similarly, you would never feel speed itself. Right now, as you sit on Earth, you are moving at tremendous velocity. The planet rotates at over 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. It orbits the Sun at roughly 67,000 miles per hour. The entire solar system moves through the galaxy at 500,000 miles per hour. And yet you feel none of this because you are moving with the Earth at the same speed in the same direction. Velocity is relative. It only has meaning in comparison to something else. In space, drifting alone with no nearby reference points, you would have no way to sense your speed. The stars would be so distant that even if you were moving at thousands of miles per hour, they would appear almost motionless, their positions changing so slowly as to be imperceptible over hours or even days. You could be racing through the cosmos or hanging perfectly still, and the subjective experience would be identical. Speed would lose its visceral meaning and become merely an abstract number, a relationship between you and some arbitrary reference frame. In fact, even motion itself would begin to lose meaning. Without landmarks, without fixed points to measure yourself against, the very concept of moving or not moving becomes philosophical rather than practical. Are you moving past the stars? Or are they moving past you? Are you traveling through space? Or is space flowing past your stationary body? Einstein taught us that these questions have no absolute answer, that motion is always relative, always dependent on your frame of reference. But on Earth, we rarely confront this reality directly. There is always the ground, always the planet itself as a reference. In space, alone, you would live Einstein's insights in a way few humans ever have. You would become a reference frame unto yourself, and the question of whether you are moving or still would become, in a very real sense, unanswerable and perhaps meaningless. Paradoxically, you would never experience true weightlessness the same way again. This requires some explanation. True weightlessness is not the absence of gravity, but the absence of anything preventing you from falling. Right now, gravity pulls you toward the Earth's center, but the ground pushes back with equal force, and you feel that push as weight, as heaviness. Astronauts in orbit are not beyond Earth's gravity. They are falling toward Earth constantly, but moving forward fast enough that they keep missing it, tracing an endless fall around the planet. They feel weightless because nothing prevents their fall. But you, drifting through interstellar space, far from any significant gravitational field, would be experiencing something different. Not the weightlessness of free fall, but the near absence of gravity itself. At first, the difference might not be apparent. Weightlessness is weightlessness, whether from falling or from the absence of gravitational pull. But there is a subtle distinction, one that astronauts report feeling. In orbit, you are always falling, always being pulled, even if you float. In deep space, you would be truly adrift, pulled by nothing strongly enough to notice, existing in a state of gravitational neutrality that is, technically, slightly different from the free fall that astronauts experience. You would never feel weight again in either case, but the quality of weightlessness would be unique to your circumstance, never quite replicable. Your path could slowly curve without you noticing. Space is not empty, not truly. Even in the vast distances between stars, there is gravity. Weak, subtle, barely detectable, but present nonetheless. Every star, every planet, every wisp of dark matter exerts its infinitesimal pull on you. And while any single source might be far too distant to affect you noticeably, the cumulative effect of all nearby masses would gently, almost imperceptibly, curve your trajectory. Over weeks and months and years, your straight-line path might bend, describing a subtle arc through space, and you would have no way of knowing. The stars would remain essentially fixed in their positions. There would be no sensation of turning, no force you could feel. Only after a very long time might you notice, if you kept careful track of your position relative to specific celestial markers, that you were not quite traveling in the direction you once were. Space itself would be guiding you, nudging you, shaping your path according to the invisible architecture of gravity that pervades the universe. Gravity from distant objects would gently guide you in this way. Imagine a massive star lying a few light years off your original path. Its gravity, even at that distance, would exert a tiny pull on you, bending your trajectory slightly toward it. You would never fall into it, the distance is too great and your sideways motion too significant, but you would curve around it in a very gentle, very long hyperbolic arc, like a comet swinging past the sun but on a vastly larger scale. And there would be countless such influences. The gravity of nearby star systems, of nebulae, of the Milky Way galaxy itself, all pulling and tugging in different directions, their effects combining to create a path that is uniquely yours, determined by your starting position and velocity and by the precise arrangement of matter in your region of space. You would be like a ship without a rudder, carried by currents you cannot see or feel, following a course determined by forces beyond your control or even your awareness. You could become gravitationally bound to nothing. This is one of the stranger possibilities. If your velocity and trajectory happen to match, even roughly, the orbital motion of some region of space around the galaxy center, you might find yourself in a kind of pseudo-orbit, not around any single object, but around the galactic core itself, billions of miles away. You would be like a planet without a sun, a moon without a planet, following the same general path as the stars around you, but belonging to none of them. Or you might pass through a region of space and find your velocity relative to nearby objects so low that you become almost stationary with respect to them, drifting very slowly in interstellar space, not orbiting anything, not escaping anything, just existing in a state of gravitational equilibrium, pulled equally and weakly in all directions by the matter surrounding you. You would be bound by gravity in the most diffuse and abstract sense, connected to everything and nothing, a part of the galaxy's gravitational structure but not in any traditional orbit. Finally, and perhaps most strangely, you would never experience directional travel. On Earth, travel is directional. You go north or south, toward the mountains or toward the sea, to the city or to the countryside. Even in an airplane, you travel from one place to another, from New York to London, with a clear origin and destination. But in space, direction loses its meaning in a way that is hard to articulate. You are not going toward anything because there is no natural coordinate system, no universal north or east. You might aim yourself toward a particular star, might think of yourself as traveling in that direction. But space is three-dimensional in a way that is difficult to grasp intuitively. That star is not a place you can arrive at in any meaningful time frame. It is thousands of years away even at impossible speeds. And as you travel, the configurations of stars around you would change so slowly as to be imperceptible for years. You would not experience the sensation of journeying toward a destination. Instead, you would simply exist, moving, yes, but moving through a medium so vast and featureless that the concept of travel, of going from here to there, would become almost abstract. You would be traveling everywhere and nowhere, your journey without milestones, without progress in any measurable sense, just endless continuation through the void. And yet, for all this lack of control, for all this surrender to physics and momentum and gravity's subtle influence, there would be something almost peaceful about it. You are not fighting against your motion. You are not struggling to maintain course or speed. You are simply being carried, a particle in the cosmic flow, moving according to laws that are older than Earth itself, older than the sun, as old as the universe. Your lack of control is complete, and perhaps in that completeness, there is a kind of freedom. You have no choices to make about your path. No decisions about direction or speed. You are absolved of the burden of navigation. You simply drift, and the universe, in its vast and impersonal way, takes you where you will go. The stars will slowly around you, and you spin gently among them, a traveler without destination, moving forever through the ancient dark. As you continue your drift through the void, as the strangeness of motion and silence becomes almost familiar, you would begin to notice something else slipping away. Something so fundamental to human experience that you might not have realized it was there until it was gone. Orientation itself. The frameworks by which you understand your place in space. The reference points that tell you where you are, what is near, what is far, what is level, what is tilted. These things, built into every landscape you have ever known, simply do not exist here. And their absence would reshape your perception in ways both subtle and profound. You would see no horizon, ever. Think about how often you see a horizon on Earth. Step outside, and unless you are in a dense forest or surrounded by buildings, there it is, the line where Earth meets sky, where the ground falls away and the atmosphere begins. It is one of the most basic organizing principles of human vision. The horizon divides your world into up and down, near and far. It gives you a sense of scale and distance. Sailors navigate by it. Artists compose paintings around it. Children draw it instinctively when asked to draw a landscape. But in space, there is no ground to end and no sky to begin. There is only the continuum of the void, stretching in every direction without boundary or edge. If you look toward a planet, you might see its curved edge against the darkness, a kind of horizon, but it would not be your horizon. It would not be a reference line for your position. It would just be the limb of a distant sphere, a geometrical feature of something far away. Your personal visual field would have no dividing line, no place where the world ends and something else begins. Every direction would look essentially the same. Darkness scattered with points of light, extending infinitely in all directions. Without a horizon, your sense of space would become isotropic, the same in every direction, and the psychological effect of this would be difficult to overstate. Humans are creatures of horizons. Without one, you would feel unmoored in a way that goes beyond the physical. You would drift through perfect symmetry. On Earth, almost nothing is perfectly symmetrical. Mountains rise unevenly. Rivers curve and wind. Even buildings, designed with symmetry in mind, show small imperfections and variations. Your world is textured, varied, asymmetrical in 1,000 small ways that give it character and navigability. But space, at the largest scales, is almost perfectly uniform. Look in any direction, and over sufficient distance, the distribution of matter is the same. Galaxies spread out evenly in all directions. The cosmic microwave background radiation, the afterglow of the Big Bang, is uniform to within 1 part in 100,000. This is perfect symmetry on a scale that Earth never achieves. And drifting through it, you would lose the asymmetries that help you orient yourself. There would be no, that way is different from this way. No, the mountains are to the east, the ocean to the west. Every direction would be statistically identical to every other direction. You could spin around completely and, if you lost track of your rotation, have no way to determine which way you had been facing before. The universe would offer you no landmarks, no distinguishing features at the scale you could perceive. You would exist in perfect, endless symmetry, and that symmetry would be both beautiful and deeply disorienting. You would never see straight lines. Geometry in space is curved. This is one of Einstein's great insights. Gravity is not a force, but a curvature of spacetime itself. Light travels in straight lines through flat spacetime, but spacetime is almost never truly flat. Massive objects bend it, and light follows those curves. On Earth, over the short distances you typically see, this curvature is negligible. A beam of light appears to travel in a perfectly straight line. But in space, over astronomical distances, the curvature becomes apparent. Light from distant stars bends around galaxies, creating Einstein rings and gravitational lenses. The path of a photon through space is a geodesic, the shortest path through curved spacetime, but it is not straight in the Euclidean sense. And not just light, but everything follows curved paths. Your own trajectory, as we discussed, would curve under the influence of distant gravity. There are no straight lines in the universe, not truly, only curves of varying subtlety. And while you might not perceive this directly, the absence of straight edges, straight beams, straight trajectories would be there, a fundamental aspect of the geometry you inhabit. Space itself is curved, warped by the matter and energy it contains, and you would be drifting through that curvature, following paths that seem straight to you but are actually gentle arcs through the fabric of reality. Your shadow would almost never appear. Shadows require three things: a light source, an object to block the light, and a surface for the shadow to fall upon. In space, you would have the first two but almost never the third. The sun, or any star, might cast light upon you, and your body would block some of that light, creating a cone of shadow extending behind you. But that shadow would fall on nothing. It would extend through empty space, invisible and intangible, a geometrical region of darkness with no physical manifestation. Only if you happen to drift near another object, a spacecraft or asteroid or planet, would your shadow appear as a visible shape on that object's surface. And even then, it would be fleeting, temporary, a rare occurrence in the vastness of empty space. For the overwhelming majority of your journey, your shadow would exist only as an abstraction, a region of space where sunlight does not reach, but with no surface to make it visible. It would be as though the shadow does not exist at all. Your body would cast no shadow in most of the universe. This is the same principle extended further. Most of the universe is empty space, unimaginably vast distances with nothing solid to catch a shadow. Even the regions that are not empty, the galaxies and star systems, are mostly emptiness punctuated by occasional matter. The actual solid surfaces in the universe, planets and moons and asteroids, are vanishingly rare compared to the volume of space itself. So your shadow, the cone of blocked light extending from your body, would pass through light years of vacuum without ever encountering anything to fall upon. It would be like shining a flashlight into the night sky. The beam extends upward, but it illuminates nothing because there is nothing there to illuminate. Your shadow would be the same, present in a technical sense, but invisible, unmanifested, a potential rather than an actuality. You would be a source of shadow, but that shadow would almost never be seen, even by you. Your body would never produce shadows on itself. On Earth, the way light falls across your body creates shadows and highlights that help you see your own three-dimensional form. Hold up your hand, and you see shadows in the creases of your palm, along the sides of your fingers, where one part of your hand blocks light from reaching another part. These self-shadows help you perceive depth and shape. But in space, illuminated by a single distant point source like the sun, One side of your body would be in full, harsh light, and the other side would be in complete darkness. There would be no atmosphere to scatter light, no nearby surfaces to reflect it back. So there would be no gentle gradations, no soft shadows on the lit side of your body. The transition from light to dark would be knife-sharp, absolute. One half of you would be in brilliant illumination, the other in total blackness, and the subtlety of shadow that helps you see the contours of your own form would be absent. You would look, if you could see yourself, almost flat, divided into regions of extreme contrast with no middle ground between them. Your reflection would be almost impossible to see. Reflections require reflective surfaces, and space has almost none. On Earth, you see yourself in mirrors, in windows, in still water, in polished metal. These are all human-made or human-discovered surfaces that happen to be smooth and reflective. In space, naturally occurring reflective surfaces are extraordinarily rare. Some asteroids might have patches of exposed metal or ice that could reflect an image, but they would be tiny needles in the cosmic haystack, and encountering one would be vanishingly unlikely. You would have no mirror, no way to see your own face, to check your appearance, to meet your own eyes. This might seem trivial, but humans are visual creatures, and we use our reflection to maintain our sense of self, to confirm our physical presence and appearance. Without it, you would have only your own body visible to you, and even that only partially. You could see your hands, your arms, your legs, your torso if you looked down, but your face would be forever invisible to you, knowable only by touch, existing in your mind as memory and imagination rather than current visual fact. Your body would never cast reflections. Just as you would not see your reflection, your body would not be reflected in anything else. There would be no shiny surface for you to appear in, no water to mirror your image, no glass to catch your form in passing. You would exist without this duplication, this external confirmation of your presence. On Earth, we leave visual traces of ourselves everywhere. We appear in photographs, in videos, in the reflective surfaces we pass. We are constantly seeing ourselves from outside, from other perspectives. In space alone, you would exist only from your own internal perspective. There would be no external view of you, no way to see yourself as others would see you, because there are no others and no surfaces to play that role. You would be singular, unreflected, existing only in your own subjective experience and in whatever memories you carried with you from Earth. You would never blink for comfort. This might seem like a strange thing to note, but it reveals something important about how alien space would be to your body. On Earth, you blink for several reasons. To clean the surface of your eye, to spread tears across it, and sometimes simply as a reaction to bright light or to rest your eyes briefly from visual stimulation. But you also blink in response to environmental conditions. A gust of wind triggers a blink. Dust in the air triggers a blink. The changing light when you move from bright sun to shadow triggers a blink. These are automatic, unconscious responses to a dynamic environment. In space, the environment would be static in a way Earth never is. No wind to trigger protective blinking. No dust or particles floating in air to threaten your eyes. The light from the sun would be constant and unchanging as long as you faced it, not flickering through leaves or dimming behind clouds. You would still blink to moisten your eyes, of course, but a whole category of blinking, the reactive environmental blink, would simply stop. It is a small thing, but it speaks to how still and unchanging space would be, how different from the constantly shifting conditions of Earth. Even your unconscious reflexes would have nothing to respond to. Your body would never cast footprints anywhere. This is perhaps the most poetic absence. Every journey you have ever taken on Earth has left some trace, however temporary. Footprints in sand or snow or mud, worn paths through grass, the compression of carpet fibers under your feet. Even on hard pavement, your passage leaves microscopic traces, tiny transfers of material, infinitesimal wear. Walking is an act of marking the earth, of leaving evidence that you were here, that you passed this way. But in space, there is nothing to mark. Your body would drift through the void, leaving no trace whatsoever. No footprints, no trail, no disturbance of any surface. You would be like a ghost, passing through the world without touching it, without altering it, without leaving any evidence of your passage. In a very real sense, you could travel for millennia through space and leave no mark upon it at all. The universe would be exactly as it was before you passed through, unchanged and unmarked by your presence. And perhaps this is the most profound aspect of this vanishing orientation. Not just that you would lack horizons and landmarks and reflections, but that you would lack any way to inscribe yourself upon your environment. On Earth, we orient ourselves partly by the marks we make, the paths we create, the changes we cause. We build cities and roads. We cultivate fields. We leave footprints. Even in wilderness, we blaze trails and stack cairns. We mark space as ours by altering it, however slightly. But in the void, you would be utterly unable to change anything. Space is too vast, too empty, too indifferent to your presence. You could no more leave a mark on it than you could leave a mark on time itself. You would drift through symmetry and darkness, through curved space-time and empty light years, casting shadows on nothing, reflected by nothing, marking nothing, oriented by nothing. The frameworks that tell you where you are and who you are would dissolve one by one until you were simply consciousness, moving through the void, witnessed by no one, leaving no trace, existing in a space that offers no reference, no boundary, no edge. Just existence, pure and unanchored, drifting through the perfect and terrible symmetry of the cosmos. Now we turn inward, away from the vast external emptiness, towards something more intimate and perhaps more unsettling. Your body, the vessel that carries your consciousness through this journey. On Earth, your body is constantly changing, constantly responding to the world around it. It grows stronger or weaker. It heals from injuries. It ages, accumulates the marks of time and experience, moves through cycles of activity and rest. But here, drifting through space without aging, your body would enter a state of suspension that has no earthly equivalent. A stillness that goes deeper than mere lack of motion. A frozen moment extended into eternity. Your muscles would not weaken over time. On Earth, muscles require resistance to maintain their strength. When you walk, your legs push against gravity with every step. When you lift something, your arms work against its weight. When you sit upright, your core muscles engage to support your spine against the downward pull. This constant low-level resistance keeps your muscles toned and functional. Astronauts in orbit face a serious problem. Without gravity to work against, their muscles begin to atrophy, weakening significantly over weeks and months. They must exercise for hours each day on special equipment just to slow this deterioration. But you, somehow sustained without aging, would not experience this decline. Your muscles would remain exactly as they were at the moment you left Earth. Not stronger, not weaker. The muscle fibers that existed in that moment would persist unchanged. You could flex your arms, move your legs, and the strength would be there, constant and unchanging, neither building from use nor fading from disuse. Your body would be locked in stasis, a snapshot of physical capability preserved indefinitely. It would be as though time itself had stopped flowing through your tissues, leaving them suspended in a single instant that never ends. Your body would not heal or decay faster. Normally, your body is in constant flux. Cells die and are replaced. Wounds heal. Bruises fade. But also, over longer timescales, things break down. Joints wear. Skin loses elasticity. DNA accumulates, copying errors. This is the process of aging, of entropy working its slow transformation on biological systems. But frozen in time as you are, none of this would happen. A cut on your hand would neither heal nor worsen. It would simply exist, unchanging, the cells at its edge neither dying nor regenerating. Your body would be caught between life and stasis, functioning but not progressing, maintaining but not renewing. There would be no healing to comfort you, but also no decay to fear. You would be biologically immortal not through the triumph of regeneration, but through the cessation of change itself. It is a kind of immortality that feels less like eternal life and more like a single moment of life extended infinitely, never moving forward or backward, just persisting. Your skin would never feel wet. This seems like a small thing, but consider how fundamental the sensation of wetness is to human experience. Rain on your face, sweat on your brow, water running over your hands as you wash them. The feeling of wetness is not actually a single sensation but a combination of temperature, pressure, and the way water reduces friction against your skin. In space, without atmosphere, liquid water cannot exist in its familiar form. If water touched your skin, it would either freeze instantly or boil away into vapor, depending on whether you were in sunlight or shadow. But either way, it would not pool or run or soak in the way you know. There would be no sensation of wetness, no feeling of moisture spreading across your skin. Even your own sweat would behave strangely, clinging to your skin in beads or evaporating immediately, never creating that familiar damp feeling. Your skin would exist in a state of perpetual dryness, and you would lose one of the most basic tactile experiences, the simple feeling of being wet, something so ordinary on Earth that you rarely think about it until it is gone. Your body would never accumulate dirt naturally. On Earth, you get dirty simply by existing. Dust settles on your skin. Oils from your hands pick up particles from everything you touch. Sweat mixes with environmental contaminants. You shed dead skin cells that mix with fabric fibers from your clothes. Dirt accumulation is a natural consequence of moving through an environment full of particles and surfaces. But in the vacuum of space, there is no dust to settle on you, no air carrying particles to your skin, nothing to brush against that might leave residue. If you had clothes, they might still shed fibers, but these would float away from you rather than clinging. Your skin would remain exactly as clean or as dirty as it was when you left Earth, unchanging. There would be no gradual soiling, no need to wash because you have gotten dirty from your environment. You would exist in a kind of artificial cleanliness, not because you are clean, but because there is nothing out here to make you dirty. It is sterility through absence, purity through void. You would never experience touch again. Not truly. Touch, as you know it, requires contact with something external to yourself. The pressure of another person's hand, the texture of fabric, the hardness of stone or the softness of moss. These sensations come from the world making contact with your skin, from your nerves registering pressure and texture and temperature variations. In space, drifting alone, there would be nothing to touch. No surfaces, no objects, no other living things. You could touch yourself, of course. Run your fingers over your own arm, press your palms together. But this is not the same as touching something other, something external. The sensation would be familiar but ultimately solitary, a closed loop of self-reference. You would lose the experience of encountering the world through touch, of learning about external objects through the way they feel against your skin. Touch is one of the most fundamental ways humans connect with their environment and with each other. Without it, you would be isolated in a way that goes beyond mere physical distance. You would be untouchable and unable to touch, surrounded by nothingness that cannot be felt. Your heartbeat would become the only rhythm left. On Earth, you are surrounded by rhythms. Day and night, the cycle of seasons, the ticking of clocks, the rhythm of footsteps, of breathing synchronized with walking, of waves on a shore or wind through trees. These external rhythms help organize your sense of time, give structure to your days and years. But in space, all of these would vanish. No day or night, Just constant sun or constant darkness depending on your orientation. No seasons. No clocks unless you brought one with you, and even then, what would it measure? What would noon or midnight mean when you are not on Earth? All external rhythms would be gone, leaving only the internal ones. Your breathing, steady and continuous. And your heartbeat, that ancient drum that has been with you since before you were born, pulsing steadily in your chest. It would become the only marker of passing moments, the only rhythm in the silence. You might find yourself acutely aware of it, feeling each beat, using it to count time in the absence of any other measure. It would be the last clock, the final rhythm, the only thing marking the flow of time through your unchanging body. You would never experience true stillness. This seems paradoxical. Here you are, floating in the void, motionless relative to the space around you, and yet you would never be truly still, because your body is always in motion. Your heart beats, your lungs expand and contract, your blood flows through your veins, your neurons fire, even your atoms vibrate with thermal energy. True stillness, absolute stillness, would require the cessation of all motion, including the motion that constitutes life itself. And even if your body could somehow become perfectly still, you would still be moving through space, drifting along your endless trajectory. Stillness, you would realize, is always relative, always partial. You might be still compared to the stars, but you are in motion through space. You might hold your limbs motionless, but your heart keeps beating. There is no such thing as absolute stillness, not for a living thing, not in a universe where everything is always in motion. You would exist in a state of perpetual subtle movement, alive and therefore never truly at rest. You would never feel acceleration, but now this fact takes on new meaning. We discussed earlier the physics of it, how acceleration without something to push against creates no sensation. But mentally, emotionally, the implications would deepen over time. Acceleration is changing. It is the universe telling you that your state of motion is different now than it was a moment ago. It is progress, movement toward or away from something. Without the ability to feel acceleration, you would lose a fundamental way of sensing change in your circumstances. On Earth, you feel acceleration dozens of times a day. Starting to walk, stopping, turning corners, climbing stairs. Each acceleration is a small confirmation that you are acting on the world, that you are changing your state. In space, you could apply force to yourself, push off from nothing with your arms, try to swim through the vacuum, and you would feel your muscles working but nothing would happen. No acceleration, no change in motion. You would be trapped in whatever state of motion you already had, unable to feel any change, unable to sense progress even if, somehow, you were making it. It would be like trying to walk in a dream where your legs move but you go nowhere, except this would be waking reality, unchangeable and persistent. You would exist without a place in the universe. On Earth, you always have a place. You are in a city, in a country, on a continent. You have an address, coordinates of latitude and longitude, a position that can be marked on a map and described to others. But in space, what would your location be? You could describe your position relative to nearby stars, but those stars are light years away and themselves moving. You could give coordinates relative to the center of the galaxy, but those coordinates would be abstract, meaningless numbers disconnected from any familiar reference. You would have no place in any conventional sense. No territory, no region, no neighborhood. You would be everywhere and nowhere, positioned only in the most technical mathematical sense, but lacking any location that would mean anything to human understanding. You would be placeless, existing in space but not of any place within it. It would be like asking where you are while floating in the middle of the ocean, except the ocean extends infinitely in all directions and has no shores, no islands, no landmarks whatsoever. You would exist undeniably, but your existence would be unmoored from location in any meaningful way. You would exist without progress or decline. This is perhaps the deepest stillness of all. On Earth, your life has a trajectory. You grow from child to adult. You learn and develop skills. You age and eventually decline. You build things, achieve goals, experience setbacks, recover, move forward. Your life is a story with chapters, with development, with change. But frozen in time, drifting through space, all of that would stop. You would not progress toward anything because there are no goals to achieve out here, no skills to develop, no growth to pursue. But you would also not decline, not weaken, not deteriorate. You would simply be, moment after moment, exactly the same as you were the moment before. It would be existence without narrative, consciousness without arc. Your memories would still be with you, the story of who you were and how you came to be here. But no new chapters would be written. Nothing would happen to you because nothing can happen in a place where change has been suspended. You would be like a character in a book, frozen at the end of a sentence, the page never turning, the story never continuing. Conscious, aware, existing, but going nowhere, becoming nothing new, just persisting in an eternal present tense that extends forever in all directions. And yet, even in this profound stillness, even in this suspension of change and progress, you would still be you. Your thoughts would continue. Your awareness would persist. You might remember Earth, replay memories over and over, imagine conversations with people you once knew. You might think about the nature of existence, consciousness, identity. You might wonder whether this constitutes life in any meaningful sense, or whether you have somehow transcended life into something else, some new category of being. Alive but not living, existing but not becoming. Your heart would beat, steady and unchanging. The only rhythm in the silence, the only movement in the stillness, marking time that means nothing, measuring moments that never accumulate into anything more. And you would drift onward, carried by momentum older than memory, through a universe that neither knows nor cares that you are there, a consciousness wrapped in flesh that neither ages nor changes, witnessing infinity from a body frozen in a single instant of biological time. Still, silent, suspended, eternal. Let us now consider what surrounds you, the immense, almost incomprehensible emptiness through which you drift. It is easy to say that space is vast, but vastness is just a word until you truly contemplate what it means. Until you imagine spending not years, not centuries, but billions of years traveling through it, and still encountering almost nothing at all. The universe is not just large. It is empty in a way that defies human intuition, empty on scales that make the largest earthly distances seem like the width of a pencil line. You could drift for billions of years without hitting anything. Billions, not metaphorically, not as exaggeration, but as literal fact. The average distance between stars in our galaxy is about 4 light-years. At human speeds, even at the speed of a fast spacecraft, that is millions of years of travel. But stars are not randomly scattered. They cluster in galaxies with vast voids between them. And even within galaxies, space is mostly empty. If you were the size of a grain of sand, and the nearest star was also a grain of sand, the distance between you would be measured in miles. Space is so empty that you could pick a random direction and travel for geological timescales, for periods longer than the entire history of complex life on Earth, and the odds of physically colliding with anything, a star, a planet, even a small asteroid, would be vanishingly small. You would pass through light years of absolute nothingness. Vacuum so perfect that the best laboratories on Earth cannot reproduce it. Emptiness so profound that you might begin to doubt whether matter exists at all, whether the universe contains anything besides you and the distant points of light you can see but never reach. This is not the emptiness of a vacant room or an empty field. This is emptiness as a fundamental property of reality, space that contains, on average, less than 1 atom per cubic meter. You would be more alone than any human has ever been, surrounded by nothing more than any mind has fully contemplated. You would drift through vast regions with no starlight at all. The universe has its dark places. Between the spiral arms of galaxies, in the voids between galactic superclusters, there are regions where stars are so distant that their light barely registers. If you drifted into such a place, the familiar starry sky would thin out, the points of light becoming fewer and dimmer, until you found yourself in near total darkness. No sun nearby illuminates you. No galaxy is visible as more than a faint smudge of light, if visible at all. Just blackness, profound and complete. Your eyes would strain to see anything, dilating fully, but there would be almost nothing to see. Perhaps the cosmic microwave background radiation, invisible to your eyes but permeating all of space, would be the only thing accompanying you. You would drift through darkness that has never known light, through regions that have been black since the universe began and will remain black until it ends. It would be like floating in the deepest ocean trench at midnight, except the ocean would be infinite and there would be no surface to swim toward, no possibility of light ever finding you again unless your trajectory happened to carry you back toward populated space over timescales that dwarf human history. You could drift past rogue planets in total darkness. Not all planets orbit stars. Some were ejected from their solar systems during formation, gravitational interactions flinging them out into interstellar space. Others formed alone, condensing from gas clouds without ever belonging to a star. These rogue planets drift through the galaxy in darkness, frozen, lifeless, invisible except for the faint infrared glow of their residual heat. There might be billions of them wandering the spaces between stars, and you could pass within miles of one and never know it. In the darkness, without reflected sunlight, the planet would be invisible. You might drift past it close enough that you could have walked to it, had there been anything to walk on, any way to change your course. A world, perhaps the size of Earth or larger, hanging there in the void, and you would glide past it unseeing and unseen, two solitary objects passing in the night, each unaware of the other. The thought is almost unbearably lonely. To come so close to something solid, something planetary, something that on some level resembles home, and yet to pass by without ever knowing it was there. You could pass through clouds of interstellar gas unnoticed. The space between stars is not completely empty. There are thin clouds of gas and dust, nebulae, the raw material from which stars form and the debris from stars that have died. Some are luminous, glowing with the light of nearby stars, or with their own internal radiation. Others are dark, cold molecular clouds visible only as silhouettes against the background stars. You might drift into one of these, and at first you would notice nothing. The gas is so diffuse, so thin, that even though the cloud might be light years across, its density is less than the best vacuum humans can create. You would not feel it. You would not see it unless it happened to be backlit by stars. But over years, over centuries, the accumulated friction of passing through even such thin gas might slow you down, ever so slightly. Particles might collect on your skin, cosmic dust adhering to you, building up atom by atom, molecule by molecule. Over millions of years, you might become coated with a thin layer of interstellar material, stardust literally sticking to you, making you part of the cloud you are passing through. But in any human time frame, you would notice nothing, just the same darkness, the same silence, drifting through matter so sparse it is nearly indistinguishable from vacuum. You would drift past ancient supernova remnants. When massive stars die, they explode with unimaginable violence, creating supernovae that briefly outshine entire galaxies. The explosion scatters the star's material across light years of space, creating expanding shells of gas and radiation. These remnants persist for thousands or millions of years, glowing faintly with residual energy, gradually fading and dispersing. You might pass through one. You might drift into a region where, millennia ago, a star died in a cataclysm of light and energy. The explosion would be long over, but its ghost would still be there. A thin, expanding bubble of ionized gas, glowing softly in wavelengths your eyes might barely perceive. You would be inside the corpse of a star, surrounded by the atoms that once burned in its core, the iron and carbon and oxygen that were forged in nuclear fire and scattered by the explosion. These are the atoms that make up planets, that make up life. You yourself are made of such atoms, remnants of ancient supernovae that predated the sun. And drifting through this nebula, you would be returning to the place where such atoms are made, surrounded by the scattered ashes of stellar death, witness to the cosmic cycle of creation and destruction that has been repeating since the first stars formed. You might see the Milky Way from the outside. If your trajectory carried you far enough, if you drifted for millions or billions of years in the right direction, you might eventually leave our galaxy entirely. And looking back, you would see something no human eye has ever witnessed except in artistic renderings and computer simulations. The Milky Way galaxy as a whole from outside. You would see it as a spiral, arms of stars and gas wrapping around a bright central bulge, glowing softly in the darkness. The combined light of hundreds of billions of stars merging into a continuous glow. It would be beautiful and terrible. Beautiful because it would be majestic, a cosmic structure of unimaginable scale and grandeur. Terrible because it would be your home, all of it, every human who has ever lived, every place that has ever mattered to anyone, reduced to a smudge of light in the darkness, receding behind you as you drift away, leaving it forever, moving into the intergalactic void where even your entire galaxy, becomes just another distant point of light among many. You would understand, in that moment, how small everything you knew really was, how inconsequential in the grand scheme of the universe. You would cross invisible borders between galaxies. Galaxies are not isolated. They exist in groups and clusters, bound together by gravity, orbiting their common centers of mass. But between these clusters are voids, vast empty spaces where few galaxies exist. These voids are the largest structures in the universe, hundreds of millions of light years across, nearly empty, bounded by the filaments and walls of galactic superclusters. If your journey took you from one cluster to another, you would cross these voids, these borders between the populated and unpopulated regions of space. There would be no sign, no marker, no way to know you had crossed from one domain to another. The transition would be gradual and invisible. The galaxies around you would simply become fewer, dimmer, more distant, until you were surrounded by almost pure darkness, drifting through the void, the largest and emptiest rooms in the universe. And then, perhaps after eons, galaxies would begin to appear again ahead of you, growing slowly brighter as you approached a new cluster, a different region of space, as foreign to your galaxy as one country is to another, yet indistinguishable except by the specific arrangement of lights in the darkness. You could drift through the remains of dead galaxies. Not all galaxies are alive with star formation. Some are old, their gas consumed or stripped away, their stars aging and dying without new ones forming to replace them. These are the red and dead galaxies, filled with old red stars, no longer bright, no longer vibrant. You might drift into one. It would still contain billions of stars, but they would be faint, dim, their light reddish and weak. The galaxy would seem like a ghost, a memory of what it once was, still holding its shape, still bound by gravity, but devoid of the energy and brilliance it had in its youth. You would be drifting through a graveyard, a mausoleum of stellar corpses, white dwarfs and neutron stars and black holes, the remnants of stars that burned out long ago. And in the silence and darkness, you might feel a kind of kinship with this place. You too are frozen in time, unchanging, neither living nor dead in the usual sense. You and this dead galaxy would be alike, both existing past your natural time, both preserved in states that are no longer quite alive. You could pass near a black hole without realizing it. Black holes do not glow. They do not emit light. They are, by definition, regions of space where gravity is so strong that nothing, not even light, can escape. The only way to see a black hole is by what it does to things around it. Stars orbiting invisible points, gas swirling and heating as it falls inward, gravitational lensing bending the light of background objects. But a solitary black hole, not actively consuming anything, drifting through interstellar space, would be completely invisible. You could pass near one, close enough that you might have seen it if it were a normal object, and you would never know. It would be a hole in space itself, a region of absolute blackness darker than the darkness around it, and you would drift past it unseeing. Only if you passed close enough for its gravity to affect you would you notice anything, and even then you might only realize it later, if at all, by noticing that your trajectory had been altered, that you were moving in a different direction than before. A black hole is the ultimate hidden danger, the invisible predator, lurking in the darkness, impossible to detect until it is too late to avoid. You might drift beyond the observable universe. The universe is expanding, and the most distant objects are receding from us faster than the speed of light because the space between us and them is itself expanding. There is a horizon, the edge of the observable universe, beyond which light has not had time to reach us since the Big Bang. Objects beyond this horizon are forever invisible to us, not because they do not exist, but because their light can never cross the expanding space to reach our eyes. If you drifted long enough, far enough, in the right direction, you might cross this boundary. You might move beyond the sphere of space that is observable from Earth, entering regions of the universe that no human telescope has ever seen or ever could see. And looking back, Earth would similarly pass beyond your horizon. The light from the Sun, from the Milky Way, from the entire local supercluster, would redshift into invisibility, unable to catch up with you across the expanding space. You would be in a part of the universe that is, from Earth's perspective, beyond reality itself, existing in a region that is, to the people and planet you left behind, as unreachable and unknowable as the spaces beyond death. You would have drifted not just far from home, but far from the very possibility of home, into a cosmos that Earth will never see and that can never see Earth. And through all of this, through the billions of years and the light years of emptiness and the dark places and the dead things and the invisible dangers, you would continue, drifting, unchanged, unaging, witness to a universe that is almost entirely nothing, punctuated by rare and fleeting somethings, stretched across distances and timescales that reduce human experience to less than a single heartbeat in the lifetime of the cosmos. You would be infinitely small and utterly alone, surrounded by vastness that has no end, no boundary, no edge you could ever reach. The universe is not just large. It is large in a way that makes largeness itself seem inadequate, and you would drift through it forever, seeing almost nothing, touching nothing, reaching nothing, just moving endlessly through the dark. Time passes differently when you are eternal. On Earth, time is measured in human increments. Seconds, minutes, hours, days. The span of a human life is perhaps 80 or 90 years, and this becomes the ruler against which all other durations are measured. But drifting through space, unaging, you would gradually lose this human sense of time. Years would become meaningless. Centuries would pass like seasons, and the universe itself would begin to reveal its own vast timescales, processes so slow they are invisible to mortal observers, but which you, frozen in your eternal moment, would have forever to witness. Your eyes would adapt to extreme darkness. Human eyes are remarkably adaptable. In bright sunlight, your pupils contract to pinpoints, protecting your retina from too much light. In darkness, they dilate fully, opening as wide as they can to gather every available photon. The photoreceptor cells in your retina adjust their sensitivity as well, a process called dark adaptation that takes about 30 minutes to complete. In total darkness, after full adaptation, human eyes can detect incredibly faint light, down to just a few photons. On Earth, you never experience complete dark adaptation because there is always some light. Moonlight, starlight, the glow of distant cities. But drifting through the dark regions of space, far from any star, your eyes would adapt more fully than they ever have. Your pupils would be fully dilated, your retinas at maximum sensitivity, straining to detect the faintest glimmer of distant galaxies. You might begin to perceive light that would be invisible under any earthly conditions. The universe would not be completely black, even in the darkest voids. There would be faint glows, barely perceptible, the combined light of billions of distant galaxies smeared across your vision like a soft haze. Your vision would become exquisitely sensitive, able to see by light so faint that it barely qualifies as light at all, just the ghost of photons crossing unimaginable distances to reach your eyes. Light from the past would constantly pass you. Light travels fast, but not infinitely fast. It moves at about 186,000 miles per second, which seems instantaneous over earthly distances but becomes significant over cosmic scales. The light from the sun takes 8 minutes to reach Earth. Light from the nearest star takes over 4 years. Light from distant galaxies takes millions or billions of years. This means that when you look at distant objects, you are seeing them as they were in the past. The light that reaches your eyes now left those objects long ago, carrying information about what they looked like then, not what they look like now. And as you drift through space, you would be constantly moving through light from different eras. Photons that left a distant star a million years ago would pass you, carrying an image of that star from a million years in its past. Moments later, photons from a slightly closer star, carrying an image from only 100,000 years ago, would arrive. You would be swimming through light from countless different moments in cosmic history, all arriving at you simultaneously, creating a composite view of the universe as it existed across vast spans of time. The universe you see would not be the universe as it is, but a patchwork of different moments, different eras, stitched together by the varying travel times of light. You would drift through ancient light that no longer has a source. Some of the light reaching you would be older than the objects that emitted it. A star might explode as a supernova, ceasing to exist, but the light it emitted before its death would continue traveling outward through space for millions or billions of years. You might find yourself bathed in light from a star that died long ago, its light still propagating through the universe like ripples on a pond after the stone that created them has sunk. You would be seeing ghosts, images of things that no longer exist, preserved only as traveling electromagnetic waves. It is a kind of cosmic archaeology, reading the past from the light that has survived into the present. But it is also melancholy. You would be surrounded by evidence of things that are gone, messages from senders who no longer exist, transmitted to a receiver who will likely never find anything but the message itself. The universe is full of such ghost light, photons traveling forever through space, carrying information about events and objects that have long since vanished, testament to things that were but are no more. You would experience eternal sunrise and sunset. If you were rotating as you drifted, which is likely, the sun or any nearby star would appear to rise and set as you turned. But these would not be the quick sunrises and sunsets of Earth, lasting minutes as the planet spins rapidly. Your rotation might be much slower, perhaps once every few hours or once every few days or even slower. The sun would creep across your field of view with glacial slowness, taking hours to rise from one horizon of your vision to another, if horizons had any meaning in your perspective. And if there were multiple stars visible, each would rise and set according to your rotation, creating a slow, complex dance of lights appearing and disappearing. a celestial choreography that repeats endlessly. But it would be eternal in another sense too. On Earth, sunrise and sunset are daily events, but they are also metaphors for beginnings and endings, for birth and death. Your sunrises and sunsets would have no such meaning. They would be purely geometric, the result of your rotation bringing light sources in and out of view, without the symbolic weight that such events carry for mortal beings who measure their lives in days. You would experience the visual phenomenon of sunrise and sunset forever, but stripped of its connection to time's passage, to the cycle of day and night that structures human life. The stars would never change position quickly. From Earth, the stars appear fixed, the so-called fixed stars of ancient astronomy, maintaining the same relative positions night after night, year after year. But they do move. Over decades and centuries, careful observation reveals that stars have proper motions, drifting slowly through space, changing the shapes of constellations so gradually that a human lifetime is too short to notice. But you, with unlimited time, would watch these motions. Over thousands of years, you would see constellations slowly deform, the patterns you might have known from Earth gradually shifting into new configurations. Orion's belt would drift apart. The Big Dipper would warp and change shape. Stars that were once neighbors would separate. New patterns would emerge. It would be like watching clouds change shape, except each transformation would take millennia. The sky would be fluid on these vast timescales, a slowly morphing tapestry of light, never the same twice, yet changing so gradually that you would barely perceive the motion, only noticing when you compared your current view to memories from thousands of years ago. You would watch stars be born and die. In regions where gas and dust are dense enough, new stars form, condensing from clouds of material, igniting nuclear fusion in their cores, and beginning to shine. These processes take millions of years from start to finish, but you would have millions of years to watch. You might observe a dark cloud gradually collapse, growing denser and hotter, until finally a new point of light appeared where there had been only darkness. You would witness birth, stellar birth, the universe creating new suns from the raw materials scattered through space. And you would watch death, too. Stars live for millions or billions of years depending on their mass, and when their fuel runs out, they die. Some swell into red giants, expanding to enormous size, glowing a deep red as they cool, before finally shedding their outer layers and fading to white dwarfs. Others, more massive, explode as supernovae, brilliant flashes of light that can briefly outshine entire galaxies before fading. You would see these deaths, scattered across the eons, each one a brief moment of brightness or transformation, and then silence. You would watch the universe recycle itself, stars dying and their material dispersing, forming new clouds, from which new stars would eventually be born. The cycle of stellar life and death would play out before you like a long, slow dance, the fundamental rhythm of cosmic existence made visible through the passage of time. The universe would age while you did not. This is perhaps the strangest contradiction of your existence. You remain frozen, unchanging, the same biological age you were when you left Earth. But the universe continues its evolution. Galaxies merge and collide, forming larger structures. Stars burn through their fuel and fade. The universe expands, growing cooler and more diffuse. This is the arrow of time, the irreversible process of cosmic evolution, and it would continue around you while you stayed the same. You would be like a fixed point in a changing landscape, watching the world transform while you remain constant. Over billions of years, you would watch the universe mature, moving through its life stages just as a living organism does, from the energetic youth of star formation and galactic collisions toward a more sedate middle age, and eventually toward old age and decline. But you would not age with it. You would be eternally young, or eternally middle-aged, or eternally whatever age you were, a biological constant in a changing cosmos, a living anachronism, a thing that no longer fits the era it exists in. You would witness the universe become redder over time. Stars are born blue and die red. Young, massive stars burn hot and blue-white, pouring out enormous amounts of energy in short, brilliant lives. As stars age, they cool and redden. And the universe as a whole is aging. The rate of star formation has been declining for billions of years. The era of vigorous star birth is mostly past. The universe is making fewer new blue stars and retaining more old red ones. Over the eons, the overall color of the cosmos would shift. The brilliant blue-white of young galaxies would fade to the warm red of aging ones. The universe would take on a sunset glow, the combined light of countless old stars blending into a pervasive reddish hue. This change would be slow, imperceptible over millions of years, but you would have billions of years to watch. You would see the universe's palette shift, growing warmer, softer, dimmer. As the energetic phase of cosmic history gives way to a quieter, cooler era. It would be beautiful in its way, this gradual reddening, like watching a forest in autumn, the bright greens of summer fading to gold and crimson. But it would also be melancholy, a visible sign of the universe's aging, a reminder that even the cosmos itself is not immune to the passage of time. Eventually, even the brightest stars would disappear. Star formation requires gas, and gas is a finite resource. Each generation of stars locks some material into dense remnants, white dwarfs and neutron stars and black holes, where it can no longer participate in new star formation. Over trillions of years, the available gas would be depleted. Fewer and fewer new stars would form, and the existing stars, burning through their fuel, would die one by one. The universe would grow darker. The brilliant galaxies would dim, their light fading as the stars within them exhausted themselves and went out. This process would take unimaginable amounts of time, trillions of years, far longer than the current age of the universe. But you would be there to see it. You would watch as the lights go out, one by one, the universe slowly fading toward darkness. Eventually, the only light would come from the faint glow of white dwarfs and the rare flash of colliding neutron stars. And then, even those would fade. The universe would approach a state called heat death, where all the energy has been used up, all the stars have burned out, and only cold, dark remnants remain. You would be a witness to the end of the Age of Light, the last era when the universe is bright and warm and full of energy. After that, only darkness and cold extending forever. You could drift beyond the reach of any light. In the far future, as the universe continues to expand and accelerate in its expansion, galaxies that are currently visible would recede beyond the cosmic horizon. The space between you and them would expand faster than light can cross it, and their light would never reach you again. The visible universe would shrink, from your perspective, as more and more galaxies slip beyond the boundary of what is observable. If you drift long enough into a future trillions of years from now, you might find yourself in a region of space where the expansion has carried everything away, where there are no galaxies close enough for their light to reach you. You would be surrounded by perfect darkness, not because there is no light being emitted anywhere, but because the expansion of space has created an insurmountable barrier, a wall that even light cannot cross. You would be alone in the dark, in a darkness more complete than any that has existed before, because it is not merely the absence of nearby light sources but the active separation from all light sources by the expansion of spacetime itself. You would exist in a pocket of darkness carved out by cosmology, isolated not just in space but by the fundamental structure of the universe. And in that darkness you would continue to drift, unchanging, eternal, the last witness to a universe that has gone dark, a consciousness preserved in a cosmos that has, from your perspective, ceased to exist. And yet, even in that ultimate darkness, you would still be aware, still thinking, still experiencing, even if there is almost nothing to experience. You would be the universe's memory of itself, a single point of awareness drifting through the dark, carrying within you the knowledge that things were once different, that the universe was once bright and full, that there were stars and galaxies and light. You would be the last light, in a sense, the light of consciousness itself, still burning when all other lights have gone out, bearing witness to a cosmos that has moved beyond the age of illumination into an era of eternal night. Time would continue to pass, though you would have no way to measure it, no changes to mark its passage. And you would drift on, through the darkness, through the silence, through the cold, unchanging and unaging, eternal and alone. A fragment of the universe's brief, bright moment preserved forever in its long, dark aftermath. There is a difference between experiencing time and understanding time. On Earth, time is given structure and meaning by the changes it brings. You age. Seasons turn. Day becomes night, becomes day again. Events happen in sequence, creating cause and effect, building narratives, shaping your life into a story with beginning, middle, and the promise of an ending. But here, drifting through space without aging, time would begin to lose its grip on you. Not the physical passage of time, which continues whether you notice it or not, but time as a psychological experience. Time as something that matters. Time as the framework within which life has meaning. Time would feel meaningless without aging. On Earth, your body is a clock. You can feel yourself growing older. Your joints stiffen slightly. Your skin changes. Your energy waxes and wanes. Even over short periods, hours and days, your body tracks time through hunger, through fatigue, through the need for sleep. These biological rhythms give time its texture, its urgency. You know that time is passing because you feel it in your flesh, in the accumulation of small changes that eventually add up to a life lived. But frozen as you are, your body would provide no such markers. You would feel no different after a year than after a day. 1,000 years would leave no more mark on you than 1,000 seconds. Without these physical indicators, time would become abstract, a number that increases without corresponding to any felt experience. You might count the rotations of your body, the cycles of light and dark if any star were visible, trying to maintain some sense of duration. But eventually you would lose track. The numbers would grow too large, too divorced from any meaningful reference. Time would continue, but it would stop meaning anything to you. It would be like counting grains of sand on a beach that extends forever. After a while, the counting itself becomes pointless, and you stop and the numbers cease to matter. You would drift through time zones without meaning. On Earth, time zones are human inventions, ways of dividing the planet so that noon roughly corresponds to when the sun is highest in the sky. They are arbitrary but meaningful, organizing human activity, coordinating schedules, giving structure to the day. When you cross from one time zone to another, the clock changes, and there is a brief moment of disorientation as you adjust. But in space, there are no time zones because there are no zones at all. No planet rotating beneath you, no sun rising and setting on a 24-hour schedule. You could continue to use Earth time if you wanted, counting seconds and minutes and hours based on memories of the planet's rotation. But it would be a fiction, a nostalgic adherence to a system that has no physical meaning in your current environment. The sun does not rise or set in any regular pattern for you. There is no midnight, no dawn, no 3:15 in the afternoon. These are concepts tied to a specific place, Earth rotating at a specific rate, and you have left that place behind. You exist in a timeless zone, or perhaps in all zones simultaneously, or in no zone at all. The question of what time it is becomes unanswerable, not because you do not know, but because the question itself has lost its meaning. You would become immune to jet lag, seasons, and clocks. Jet lag is a disruption of your circadian rhythm, the internal biological clock that regulates sleep and wakefulness based on the cycle of day and night. When you cross time zones rapidly, your body's internal clock no longer matches the external environment, and you feel tired at the wrong times, alert when you should be sleeping. But in space, there is no external cycle to match or mismatch. Your circadian rhythm might persist for a while, driven by internal mechanisms, but without the regular cues of light and dark, it would eventually drift, losing its 24-hour period, becoming irregular or perhaps fading altogether. You would exist outside the tyranny of the sleep-wake cycle. Similarly, seasons are caused by Earth's axial tilt and orbit around the Sun, creating regular changes in temperature and daylight hours. In space, there are no seasons. No spring or fall, no summer or winter. Just the constant whatever it is of your current environment. And clocks, those mechanical or digital devices humans use to track time, would become curiosities, relics of a world where time was divided into equal units that corresponded to something meaningful. You could wear a watch, watch its hands sweep around the dial or its digits increment, but what would it be measuring? What would it mean for an hour to pass, or a day, or a year? These units would be empty, mathematical abstractions without connection to any lived experience. You would exist without being counted. Censuses, statistics, population counts, these are ways humans track themselves, measure themselves, understand their collective existence. But you would be outside all such systems. There is no census of interstellar space, no registration, no record of your existence drifting through the void. You would be uncounted and uncountable, a population of one in a region where the concept of population has no meaning. And because you do not age, you would not even accumulate years in a way that could be tallied. You are not getting older, so in a sense, you are not accumulating time at all, not in the biological sense. You exist, but your existence does not increment any counter, does not add to any total. You are outside the systems by which life is measured and tracked and understood. You are unrecorded, unregistered, unmeasured, existing in a state that is almost statistical impossibility, a single data point drifting alone through infinite space, too small and too isolated to be part of any larger pattern. You would outlive the concept of now. The present moment, now, is defined in part by its fleeting nature. It is the razor's edge between past and future, the instant in which things happen, which immediately becomes the past as the next instant arrives. Now has meaning because it is brief, because it changes, because it is the moment in which you are alive and acting. But if you exist forever, unchanging, does now still have meaning? Every moment is now for you, and yet none of them are special, none of them different from the moments that came before or will come after. Now would stretch out infinitely in all directions, ceasing to be a point and becoming instead the entirety of your experience. You would exist in an eternal present tense, where there is no meaningful distinction between this moment and the next, where now has expanded to include everything and therefore nothing. The psychological experience of the present moment, that sense of being in a specific time that is distinct from other times, would dissolve. You would be everywhere in time and nowhere in time simultaneously, existing but not experiencing the passage of moments in the way that gives now its urgency and significance. You would never know when enough time has passed. On Earth, you make judgments about duration all the time. You wait a few minutes for water to boil. You study for several hours to prepare for a test. You spend years building a career or raising children. There is a sense of proportionality, of certain tasks requiring certain amounts of time, and of knowing when enough time has elapsed. But in your eternal drift, there would be no enough. How long is enough time to drift through a void? How long should you wait before expecting something to happen? 1,000 years might seem like enough, but if nothing has happened, should you wait 1,000 more? 1,000,000 more? 1,000,000,000? There is no standard, no reference by which to judge. And because you do not age, there is no internal pressure, no sense that time is running out and you must accomplish something before it does. You could wait for any length of time without cost, without impatience in the usual sense, because impatience implies that you have limited time and are wasting it by waiting. but you have unlimited time. Waiting costs you nothing, which paradoxically makes waiting feel like it could go on forever, which it can. You would be caught in a state of infinite patience, not because you are virtuous, but because you have no reason to ever decide that enough time has passed. You would exist without an ending. Endings give life structure. The knowledge that things end, that time is finite, creates meaning and urgency. You cherish moments because they will not last. You accomplish things because you have only so much time to do them. Mortality is a horizon that makes everything before it precious and significant. But you would have no ending, at least no visible one. You would continue indefinitely without any natural termination point, without any sense of running out of time. This might seem like a gift, but it would also remove one of the fundamental organizing principles of existence. Without an ending, there is no reason to do anything in particular, no reason to value one moment over another. All moments are equivalent because there will always be more of them. You would exist in a state of infinite postponement, where nothing is urgent because there is always later, always more time, always another eon in which to think or feel or experience. And this might lead to a kind of existential paralysis, where the abundance of time makes time itself worthless, where the lack of an ending makes it impossible to begin anything, because beginnings imply endings, and you have no endings left. You would never witness a moment again. A moment is more than just a brief duration. It is a psychologically significant event, a time when something important happens, when change occurs, when the world pivots in some meaningful way. Moments are defined by their uniqueness and their impact. Your wedding day is a moment, the birth of a child, a sudden realization, an unexpected loss. These are moments because they are distinct, because they alter the course of your life in ways that other times do not. But in the unchanging void, there would be no such moments. Nothing would happen to you. No events would unfold. Every second would be essentially like every other second, undifferentiated, unmarked by significance. You might witness distant cosmic events, a supernova, a galactic collision, but they would not affect you personally. They would be spectacles, observations, not moments in the sense of lived experience. You would drift through time, but time would not bring moments, just continuity, sameness, the endless repetition of essentially identical states. You would lose the texture of lived time, the sense that sometimes matter more than others, that history is made of key moments separated by stretches of less important time. Everything would flatten into equivalence, an infinite expanse of undifferentiated duration. You would drift through regions where physics feels subtle. This is harder to describe, but space is not perfectly uniform. The laws of physics are the same everywhere, but their effects vary depending on local conditions. Near massive objects, gravity is strong and spacetime is noticeably curved. In dense regions, particle interactions are more frequent. In near-perfect vacuum, quantum effects that are usually drowned out by thermal noise can become apparent. As you drift through different regions, the physical environment around you would change subtly. The density of stray atoms and photons would vary. The gravitational gradients would shift. The intensity of cosmic rays would fluctuate. These changes would be too subtle for you to feel directly, but they would be there, altering the physics of your immediate environment in small ways. You would be drifting through a landscape of varying physical conditions, each region slightly different from the last, and over vast timescales. These subtle differences might accumulate into something noticeable, though what exactly you would notice is hard to say. Perhaps the rate at which your body accumulated cosmic dust would vary. Perhaps the slow erosion of any materials you carried with you would proceed differently in different regions. The universe would reveal itself as textured, layered, varying in ways that are invisible on human timescales but become apparent when you have eternity to observe. You would never witness a beginning again. Just as there would be no more moments, there would be no more beginnings. Beginnings are the start of something, the initiation of a new process, the birth of a new situation. But in your unchanging state, nothing new begins. Your journey has already begun and continues indefinitely. You do not start new activities, embark on new projects, enter new phases of life. You simply continue endlessly in the state you are already in. The psychological experience of beginning something, the mixture of excitement and uncertainty that comes with starting anew, would be lost to you. You would exist only in the middle of things, in the eternal continuation of a journey that has no start point that you can remember and no end point that you can foresee. Beginnings require change, require the initiation of something that was not there before. But you have left the realm of change behind. You are in stasis, and stasis has no beginnings, only the endless prolongation of what already is. And in this state, time would cease to be a river carrying you forward and would become instead an ocean in which you float, directionless, without landmarks to measure your position or your progress. You would exist in time, but time would no longer shape your existence the way it does for mortal beings. You would be temporal in the sense that you persist through duration, but atemporal in the sense that duration no longer affects you, no longer changes you, no longer means anything to you. You would be time's witness, but also time's prisoner, trapped in a state where time passes but brings nothing new, changes nothing, accomplishes nothing. You would understand, perhaps more deeply than any mortal could, that time itself is not the fundamental thing. It is change that matters. It is transformation, growth, decay, the movement from one state to another. And you would have none of that. You would have only duration, pure and empty, stretching forever in all directions, carrying you nowhere, meaning nothing. The universe's clock would tick on, counting eons, but for you, it would be silent, its ticking unheard, its passage unfelt, its measurements irrelevant to an existence that has transcended time by becoming trapped within it, frozen in an eternal moment that refuses to end and refuses to begin, just continuing, forever, in the timeless space between what was and what will be. We have explored the external universe, the vast darkness and light, the physics of motion and time. But now we must turn inward, to the only place that would truly remain yours in all this emptiness. Your mind, your consciousness, the interior landscape of thought and memory that would be your constant companion through eternity. And here, in this inner universe, the most profound transformations would occur. Not to your body, which remains frozen, but to your sense of self, your understanding of who and what you are, slowly reshaped by the infinite duration and absolute isolation of your journey. You might slowly forget the concept of distance. Distance is learned through experience. You understand that the store is a mile away because you have walked that mile, felt the time it takes, the effort required. You know the moon is far because you can see it but never touch it, never reach it no matter how you try. Distance is always relative, always understood in comparison to your body, your movement, your lived experience of crossing space. But in the void, you would have no such experiences. You would drift, yes, but you would have no landmarks to measure your progress against. A light year is not something you can feel or walk or comprehend through your senses. It is an abstraction, a number, and without the sensory experience of crossing it, the number would become hollow. Over time, you might find the concept of distance becoming strange to you, difficult to grasp. Is that star far away? What does far mean when you cannot walk to it, cannot drive to it, cannot measure the journey in any units that relate to your body scale? Distance might collapse into a simple binary, here and not here. Things that are where you are and things that are not. The nuanced understanding of near and far, close and distant would fade, replaced by a simpler, more fundamental division. You would exist in your location, and everything else would exist in its location, and the space between would lose its meaning as a measurable, understandable thing. Your memories would become your only landscape. Without external stimulation, without new experiences, your mind would turn inward. And what it would find there is memory. Everything you experienced on Earth, every person you knew, every place you visited, every conversation, every meal, every sunset. These memories would be all you have. They would become the world you inhabit, more real in some ways than the physical void around you, because they have texture and detail and meaning that the void lacks. You would revisit these memories again and again, walking through them like familiar rooms, examining them from different angles, reliving them, reinterpreting them. A childhood memory of playing in a garden might be returned to thousands of times, each time noticing different details, feeling different emotions. The memories would become polished through repetition, worn smooth like stones in a river, perhaps losing some of their original accuracy but gaining a kind of mythic quality, becoming the stories you tell yourself about who you were, about where you came from. They would be your only landscape, the only place you could travel, the only source of variety and richness in an existence otherwise defined by unchanging void. And you would treasure them, guard them, because they would be all that remains of Earth, of humanity, of the life you once lived in a world that was not empty. Your thoughts could begin to loop. The human mind is not designed for infinite duration in unchanging conditions. On Earth, your thoughts are constantly refreshed by new stimuli, new experiences, new information. Even in meditation or solitude, there are subtle variations, the play of light, the sounds of the environment, the sensations of your body that keep your mind engaged with the present. But in the void, with no new input, your thoughts might begin to circle back on themselves. You would think something, and then later, perhaps much later, you would think it again, not remembering that you had already thought it, or remembering but unable to think anything else. The same reflections, the same questions, the same memories, recurring over and over in patterns that gradually become routine. It would be like a song stuck in your head, except the song would be your entire mental life. You might try to break the loops to think new thoughts, but where would those thoughts come from? Thought is partly generative, arising from within, but it is also reactive, responding to the world. Without a world to respond to, the generative capacity might exhaust itself, running through all possible combinations and permutations until it begins repeating. You would become aware of the loops, perhaps, recognizing that you have thought this before, felt this before, but unable to escape them because there is nothing else to think about, nothing else to engage with. Your mind would be both free, unbound by external constraints, and trapped, circling endlessly within the limits of its own contents. You would drift through time without creating memories. Memory formation requires change, requires new information to encode and store. But if nothing happens, if nothing changes, there is nothing to remember. Days on Earth are memorable because each one is different in some way. Different weather, different interactions, different tasks completed or failed. Even similar days have small variations that make them distinct. But your days in space would be identical. The same view or lack of view. The same sensations or lack of sensations. The same activities or lack of activities. After a while, these identical periods would cease to form distinct memories. They would blur together, 1,000 years feeling like a single long moment because there are no markers to divide them, no events to create memory boundaries. You might remember the beginning of your journey, the transition from Earth to space, because that was change, that was eventful. But the middle, the long drifting years would be a blank, not because you were unconscious, but because there was nothing to remember. You would be aware, thinking, experiencing, but not encoding those experiences as distinct memories because they are not distinct. And so your subjective experience of time would become fragmented, broken. You would remember Earth clearly, remember the beginning, and then vast stretches of nothing, and then perhaps some distant cosmic event you witnessed, and then more nothing, your life becoming a scattered collection of islands of memory in an ocean of undifferentiated duration. You would become detached from cause and effect. Cause and effect is a temporal relationship. You push a button, and a light turns on. The push causes the light. This relationship happens in time because preceding effect, and it creates a sense of agency, of your actions having consequences. But in space, your actions would have no consequences, no effects. You could move your arms, but nothing would change. You could speak, but no one would hear. You could think, but your thoughts would alter nothing in the external world. The causal chains that bind action to outcome would be severed. You would act or refrain from acting, and the universe would continue exactly as it would have regardless. This might lead to a profound detachment, a sense that cause and effect are no longer meaningful categories. Things happen or they do not happen, but not because of anything you do or do not do. The universe unfolds according to its own laws, its own timescales, completely independent of your will or your presence. You would witness causality, perhaps, in the cosmic events you observe, stars causing light, gravity causing motion, but you would not participate in it. You would be outside the web of cause and effect that governs life on Earth, a pure observer, unable to cause anything, unaffected by anything, floating free of the causal structure of reality itself. Your name would eventually lose meaning. What is a name? It is a label, a way for others to refer to you, to call your attention, to distinguish you from other people. But in space, alone, there are no others to use your name. No one to call out to you. No need to distinguish yourself from anyone else because there is no one else. You might repeat your name to yourself for a while, clinging to it as a piece of your identity, a reminder of who you are. But over time, it would begin to feel strange, arbitrary. Why this particular sound? What does it signify? On Earth, your name carries history, was given to you by parents, used by friends and loved ones, associated with your identity and your life. But here, all that context is gone. Your name is just a sound, a word, disconnected from any social function or meaning. And eventually, you might stop thinking of yourself by that name at all. You would still be you, still have continuity of consciousness and memory, but the linguistic label would fall away as unnecessary, a relic of a social world that no longer exists. You would be nameless, not because your name was taken from you, but because names only have meaning in relation to others, and you have no others, will never have others again. You would become older than language. Language itself is only a few tens or hundreds of thousands of years old, depending on how you define it. Writing is only about 5,000 years old. The languages you know, English or whatever tongue you spoke on Earth, are even younger, evolving and changing over centuries. If you drifted for 1,000,000 years, you would be older than any language currently spoken on Earth. Older than Latin, older than Sanskrit, older than the oldest known written words. You would outlive not just the languages themselves, which would continue to evolve on Earth without you, but the entire concept of linguistic change. You would remember a language that, on Earth, might be dead and forgotten, or transformed beyond recognition. Or perhaps, in your isolation, you would continue to use that language internally, keeping it alive in your mind even as it died or changed in the world. You would become a living fossil, preserving a moment of linguistic history, a snapshot of how humans spoke in a particular era, carried forward through deep time. And if you drifted long enough, you might become older than the concept of language itself, older than the first words spoken by the first humans, existing in a timescale where even the idea of communicating through symbolic sounds would seem like a brief, recent invention, a flash in the long, dark history of the universe. You would outlast curiosity itself. Curiosity is a response to novelty, to the unknown. You wonder what is around the corner, what will happen next, how something works. Curiosity drives exploration, learning, and growth. But curiosity requires that there be something to be curious about, something unknown that could become known. In the unchanging void, curiosity would have nothing to attach to. You have seen what there is to see, which is mostly nothing. You understand your situation as well as you can. There are no mysteries to solve, no questions to answer, at least not in your immediate environment. And so curiosity, which burns so brightly in human minds on Earth, would gradually dim and fade. Not because you chose to stop being curious, but because curiosity without object is impossible to sustain. You might retain the capacity for curiosity, the neural structures that support it, but it would lie dormant, unused like a muscle that atrophies from lack of exercise. And in its place might come something else, perhaps acceptance, perhaps indifference, perhaps a kind of cosmic patience that does not ask questions because it knows no answers are forthcoming. You would exist in a state beyond curiosity, not ignorant, not uninterested, but simply past the point where curiosity has any function or purpose. You would become smaller than dust on a cosmic scale. This is not about your physical size, which remains the same, but about your significance, your proportional place in the universe. A speck of dust in a room is small, but it is still noticeable under the right conditions, still visible, still present. But you, in the context of the observable universe, would be infinitesimally small. Smaller than the smallest mote in a sunbeam. The observable universe contains hundreds of billions of galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars, many with planets, moons, asteroids, comets. The total amount of matter is staggering, beyond comprehension. And you are one human body, a few tens of kilograms of organized matter, drifting through this vastness. The ratio of your mass to the universe's mass is so small it might as well be zero. You would be, for all practical purposes, nothing. A rounding error, a statistical fluctuation. You would come to understand on a visceral level just how insignificant you are in the grand scheme. Not insignificant in a moral or emotional sense, but mathematically, physically insignificant. You matter infinitely to yourself, but to the universe you are less than a whisper, less than a shadow, barely existent at all. You would become a question with no answer. What are you exactly? Are you alive? Yes, in the sense that your biological processes continue, but no, in the sense that life is usually defined by growth, reproduction, response to environment, and you do none of those things. Are you dead? No, clearly not. You are conscious and aware. Are you a person? You have memories of being a person, of living in human society, but can you still be a person when you have no social context, no relationships, no community? Personhood is partly defined by our connections to others, and you have none. Are you human? Biologically, yes, but experientially you have moved so far from the human condition that the label might not fit anymore. You are something else, something unprecedented, something that the language of Earth has no adequate words for. A consciousness without context, an observer without observation, a self without society. You would be a question that philosophers and theologians might debate if they knew you existed, but they do not, and you cannot answer the question for yourself. You simply are, whatever that means, existing in a category that has no name, defying the definitions and boundaries that make identity comprehensible. You would drift through space and time as an unresolved question, a paradox of existence, neither one thing nor another, but something in between, something new and strange that the universe has never seen before and may never see again. And in your mind, in that inner universe that is now your only true home, all of these transformations would unfold. Your thoughts would loop and your memories would fade and your identity would blur and you would continue, somehow, to be yourself or what remains of yourself or what yourself has become. You would be the last witness to your own existence, the only one who knows you are here, the only one who remembers that you were once on Earth, once had a name, once were human in the fullest sense. And the question that might haunt you, if anything can haunt you anymore, is whether this continuation, this persistence of consciousness without purpose or context or change, whether this constitutes existence in any meaningful sense, or whether you have crossed some invisible boundary into a new state of being that is neither life nor death, neither presence nor absence, but something else entirely, something that can only be experienced, never explained, never understood, just endured, forever, in the silent darkness of your own unending thoughts. Loneliness is a feeling you know from Earth, the ache of being separated from loved ones, the hollow sensation of sitting alone in a crowd, surrounded by people but connected to none of them, the quiet sadness of a Sunday evening spent by yourself when you wish you were with someone else. But these are all temporary states, flavored by the knowledge that they will end, that connection is possible, that somewhere other people exist and you might find them again. What you would experience in space is not loneliness. It is something deeper, more absolute, more final. It is solitude not as a temporary condition but as a permanent state of being. It is the complete and irrevocable severing of all connection to anything else that thinks, feels, or knows. You might never see another living thing. Not might in the sense of unlikely, but might in the sense of genuinely uncertain, because the universe might or might not contain other life, and even if it does, the chances of encountering it are vanishingly small. Space is vast, life is rare, and you are moving randomly through the darkness with no ability to steer toward anything. The odds of your path intersecting with another living being, another consciousness, another entity capable of recognizing you or being recognized by you are effectively zero. You could drift for billions of years and never pass within a light year of another planet harboring life. Never detect a signal from an alien civilization. Never witness any evidence that consciousness exists anywhere else in the universe. You might be the only aware being in all the space your trajectory covers, the only point of subjectivity in countless cubic light years of objective emptiness. And you would never know for certain. You could not prove that life does not exist elsewhere, only that you never found it. You would exist in a state of permanent epistemic isolation, unable to confirm or deny whether you are the only conscious being in your region of space, knowing only that you have never encountered another and likely never will. You would outlast civilizations without ever knowing them. Life evolves slowly. Civilizations rise and fall. On Earth, the entire span of recorded human history is only about 5,000 years. Civilizations rise, flourish for centuries or millennia, and then collapse, are conquered, or transform into something unrecognizable. The Egyptians, the Romans, the Maya, each dominant in their time, each now gone. If intelligent life exists elsewhere in the galaxy, on planets orbiting other stars, those civilizations would be going through similar cycles. They would emerge from pre-technological states, develop science and culture, perhaps reach for the stars, and then eventually end. Some might destroy themselves. Some might evolve into post-biological forms. Some might simply fade away as their stars age and die. And you would drift past their solar systems, or through the spaces between them, completely unaware. A civilization might flourish on a planet you pass within a few light years of, building cities, creating art, asking the same questions about existence and meaning that humans ask. And you would never know. They would never know about you. You would be utterly invisible to each other, two instances of consciousness existing in the same general region of space but separated by time or distance or sheer chance, never intersecting, never touching, never aware of each other's existence. You would outlast them, continuing long after their star has gone cold and their world is silent, carrying forward in ignorance of what once was, what briefly existed, what might have been kindred to you if only you had known. You would become invisible to future civilizations. Even if a civilization were to arise after you pass through their region of space, even if they develop telescopes powerful enough to scan the cosmos for any signs of life or intelligence, they would not see you. You are too small, too dark, too insignificant against the backdrop of space. A human body does not emit enough light or radiation to be detected across interstellar distances. You do not broadcast signals. You leave no trail. You are, from any practical observational standpoint, non-existent. Future alien astronomers might catalog the stars you drift past, might study the galaxies in your path, might even detect individual planets and asteroids, but they would never detect you. You would pass through their sky unnoticed, invisible, a ghost that leaves no trace. And this invisibility is absolute and permanent. There is no technology, no matter how advanced, that would make you detectable to a distant observer, because you are simply too small and too passive. You exist, but in a way that is fundamentally unobservable to anyone who is not right next to you. And no one will ever be right next to you again. You would never be found. On Earth, if someone goes missing, there are search parties, investigations, and efforts to locate them. People can be found, even years or decades later, because Earth is finite and searchable. But space is infinite for all practical purposes, and you are an infinitesimally small object in that infinity. No search, no matter how diligent, could ever find you. There are too many directions you could have gone, too much space to cover, too few resources that anyone would commit to searching. And even if someone wanted to find you, even if humanity or some other civilization decided to search for you specifically, they would need to know where to look. But your trajectory is chaotic on long timescales, influenced by countless gravitational interactions, impossible to predict with precision over thousands or millions of years. You would be lost in the most fundamental sense. Unfindable, irretrievable, gone beyond any hope of recovery. And knowing this, carrying this knowledge with you, would be its own kind of weight. You are not waiting to be rescued because rescue is impossible. You are not hoping to be found because being found is impossible. You simply exist, alone, with the absolute certainty that this aloneness will never end. Your presence would never alter the universe. On Earth, every person changes the world in some way, however small. You speak and sound waves ripple outward. You walk and you displace air, compress the ground, leave footprints. You touch things and transfer heat and molecules. You consume resources and produce waste. You interact with other people, changing their thoughts and actions through your words and presence. But in space, you would change nothing. Your body drifts through the vacuum, but the vacuum is unchanged by your passage. You block light from distant stars, but that light would have continued into the void anyway, unobserved and meaningless. You might drift through clouds of interstellar gas, but your passage would not noticeably affect them. You are a closed system, self-contained, non-interacting. The universe would be exactly the same whether you are in it or not. You would be physically present but causally absent, existing but not mattering, there but making no difference. It is a kind of irrelevance so complete that it borders on non-existence. You would be like a character written into a story but given no lines, no actions, no plot significance, just present in the background, noticed by no one, affecting nothing, a detail so minor that the story would be unchanged if you were deleted entirely. You would exist beyond the idea of survival. Survival implies threat, implies that your continued existence is not guaranteed, that you must take action to persist. But you cannot die. Somehow, impossibly, you are sustained without aging, without decay. There is nothing that threatens you, no predators, no diseases, no dangers. Survival ceases to be a concern because it ceases to be an achievement. You do not survive through any effort or skill. You simply continue because your continuation is a given, built into the premise of your existence. And this removes one of the fundamental drivers of life. Living things strive to survive. They seek food, avoid danger, and reproduce to ensure genetic survival. These drives create purpose, motivation, meaning, but you have none of that. You are not surviving. You are not striving. You are just persisting automatically without choice or effort or accomplishment. You exist beyond survival, in a state where existence itself is trivial, guaranteed, meaningless because it costs nothing and achieves nothing and can never be threatened or ended or changed. You would exist without being counted, but now we understand this differently. Earlier we spoke of censuses and statistics, but the deeper truth is this: you would exist outside any framework of meaning-making that requires multiple instances. Mathematics, language, science, philosophy, all of these make sense of the world by categorizing, comparing, relating one thing to another. But you are a category with only one member, a set containing only yourself. And in many ways, such a set is meaningless. You cannot be compared to others because there are no others. You cannot be typical or unusual, average or exceptional, because these terms require a population to compare against. You simply are singular, incomparable, uncategorizable. You would exist as a pure particular, an individual without any universal, a data point that cannot be part of any larger pattern because no larger pattern exists. And this would strip away layers of meaning that you might not have realized were there. You would understand, finally, how much of identity is relational, how much of meaning depends on context and comparison, and how, in the absence of all that, you are reduced to bare existence, stripped of almost all the conceptual frameworks that make existence comprehensible. You would remain unchanged while meaning changes. Meaning is not fixed. It evolves with context, with culture, with time. On Earth, the meaning of words shifts over centuries. The significance of actions changes as society changes. What was once shameful becomes acceptable. What was once valuable becomes trivial. But you would remain the same, frozen in your moment, while the universe around you continues to evolve. If Earth survives, if humanity persists, the meanings and values you knew would change beyond recognition. The language you spoke might become unintelligible. The beliefs you held might be forgotten or transformed. The very concept of what it means to be human might evolve into something alien to you. And you would carry forward the old meanings, the old understandings, preserved like an insect in amber, a relic of a particular moment in Earth's cultural evolution. But you would have no way to know what meanings have replaced the ones you knew. You would be semantically stranded, holding concepts and values that might no longer exist anywhere else in the universe, a living fossil of thought, obsolete but unable to update, unable to learn the new meanings, unable to grow beyond the framework you carried with you when you left. You would outlast the memory of Earth. Memory is not permanent, not even collective memory. Civilizations forget their own histories. Languages die and take their literature with them. Records decay, are lost, are destroyed. Even with the best efforts at preservation, information is gradually lost to time. The ancient world is known to us only in fragments, through ruins and scattered texts, most of the details gone forever. And over longer timescales, the loss is more complete. If you drifted for billions of years, long enough for Earth itself to be destroyed when the sun expands into a red giant, then even the physical evidence of Earth's existence would vanish. The planet consumed, its atoms scattered, and any records humanity created, any monuments or messages sent into space, would be rare and possibly never found. You might become the last repository of certain memories, the only entity in the universe that remembers specific things about Earth. A particular tree in a particular park, the smell of rain in your hometown, the face of someone you loved. These memories, which once were shared, which once were part of a collective human experience, would become unique to you, preserved only in your mind. And then, in a profound sense, you would be Earth's memory, the last witness to things that no longer exist anywhere else, carrying forward information that would otherwise be lost to the universe forever. You would be a library of one, and when you finally end, if you ever do, those memories would be erased from reality completely, as though they never were. You would become a thought the universe never thinks. The universe, as far as we know, is not conscious. It does not think or know or remember. It simply is operating according to physical laws, unaware of itself. Consciousness is rare, perhaps unique to biological beings, perhaps emerging only in complex nervous systems like yours. You would be one of the universe's few or only points of self-awareness, one of the rare locations where the universe looks at itself and knows that it exists. But you would be isolated, disconnected from any larger network of consciousness. Your thoughts, your awareness, your subjective experience would be completely private, known only to you, inaccessible to any other mind. In a sense, you would be a thought that the universe thinks but does not know it is thinking. Your consciousness would exist within the universe, made of the universe's matter and energy, but utterly isolated from any other consciousness, unable to share itself, unable to be known. You would be like a neuron that fires in a brain but whose signal never reaches any other neuron, never contributes to any larger pattern of thought. You exist, you experience, you are aware, but your awareness makes no difference to anything else. It is private to the point of being almost unreal, a subjective experience that has no objective consequences, no witness, no record, no effect. You would be consciousness in its purest, most isolated form, aware but unknowable, thinking but never thought about, existing in a state of absolute subjective solitude. And this solitude, this absolute and final aloneness, would be the deepest truth of your existence. Not the physics of your motion, not the strangeness of unchanging time, not even the vastness of the space you drift through. The core of your experience would be this: you are alone. Completely, utterly, permanently alone. Alone in a way that has no analogy in human experience, because every human who has ever lived has at least existed in a world with other humans, has known that others exist even if they are distant or inaccessible. But you would exist in a space where, for all you know, you are the only consciousness, the only aware being, the only point of light in an infinite darkness of unconscious matter and energy. You would be the solitary witness to your own existence, the only one who knows you are here, the only one who could possibly care that you continue. And you would drift forward, through the eons, carrying this awareness, this terrible and total solitude, with no hope of ever breaking it, no possibility of ever finding another, no chance of ever being anything other than absolutely, finally, eternally alone. And so we arrive at the end of our journey through this thought experiment, though for you, drifting through space, there would be no such arrival. No conclusion, no final chapter, just continuation, endless and unchanging, stretching forward into a future that has no boundary, no terminus, no last page. We have explored what you would lose, what you would experience, what you would become. But now, in this final contemplation, we must confront the most fundamental truth of all, that there is no ending, that everything we have described would simply continue, forever, without resolution, without closure, without any moment that could be called the end. You would never see a sky change color. On Earth, the sky is a living canvas, constantly transforming. The pale blue of morning deepening into the rich azure of midday. The spectacular oranges and pinks and purples of sunset, as the sun's light scatters through the atmosphere at oblique angles. The deep indigo of twilight, gradually darkening to the black of night, scattered with stars. Storm clouds rolling in, turning the sky gray and ominous. The weird green light before a tornado. The soft silver of an overcast day. Every few hours, the sky changes, shifts, offers something new to see. It is one of the most fundamental rhythms of earthly existence. This cycle of sky colors, marking time and weather and the planet's rotation. But in space, the sky would never change. If you faced the sun, there would be black sky filled with stars and the sun's harsh light. If you faced away, just black sky and stars. No atmosphere to scatter light, no changing angle to create sunset colors. The view would be static, fixed, unchanging across years and centuries and millennia. You would never again see the sky blush pink at dawn or deepen to orange at dusk. Never see storm clouds gather or clear skies emerge after rain. The sky would be the same, always, in every moment, a constant backdrop that never shifts, never transforms, never offers any variation to mark the passage of time or the changing of conditions. It would be like staring at a photograph that never changes, except the photograph would be your entire visual world. Forever. You would never experience anticipation again. Anticipation is the feeling of looking forward to something, of knowing that change is coming, that something different and potentially better or more interesting is approaching. You anticipate the weekend after a long week of work. You anticipate a meal when you are hungry. You anticipate seeing a friend you have not seen in a while. Anticipation gives the present moment a forward momentum, a sense of progression towards something. But in your unchanging drift, there would be nothing to anticipate. No events approaching, no changes coming, no future moment that would be different from the current moment in any way that matters. You might think, perhaps tomorrow something will happen. But tomorrow would be exactly like today and the day after that and the day after that. Any anticipation you felt would be unfounded, a habit of mind that persists past its usefulness. Eventually, you would stop anticipating anything, not through pessimism or depression, but through simple realism. There is nothing to look forward to because nothing is coming. The future is just more of the present, endlessly repeated. You would exist in a state of permanent presentness, without the psychological relief that comes from knowing change is on the horizon. Every moment would be the same, and every moment would be now, and now would never transform into something else. You would eventually forget the feeling of rest. Rest is meaningful only in contrast to exertion. You rest when you are tired, when you have been active and need to recover. Sleep restores you after the exertions of waking life. A moment of sitting feels good after a long walk. Rest is relief, recovery, the body and mind returning to baseline after being pushed beyond it. But in space, you would never exert yourself. There would be nothing to push against, nothing to struggle with, no tasks that drain your energy. Your body would remain in its frozen state, never tiring, never accumulating the fatigue that makes rest necessary and pleasurable. And without fatigue, rest would lose its meaning. You could close your eyes, could remain still, could do all the external behaviors of resting, but the internal experience, that sense of relief and recovery, would be absent. Rest requires that there be something to rest from, and you would have nothing. You would exist in a state that is neither exertion nor rest, neither tired nor refreshed, just a constant baseline that never varies. The feeling of rest, that deep satisfaction of lying down after a long day, of sleep after exhaustion, would fade from your memory, become incomprehensible, a sensation that belonged to a different kind of existence, one where effort and recovery formed a meaningful cycle. You would never see motion up close. On Earth, you are constantly seeing things move near you. A bird flying past, person walking by, leaves rustling in the wind, your own hand moving in front of your face. Motion is immediate, visible, comprehensible at human scales. But in space, everything that moves is very far away. Stars have their proper motions, but they are so distant that even traveling at hundreds of miles per second, they appear almost stationary, their positions changing imperceptibly slowly. Galaxies rotate and move, but these movements take millions of years to become apparent. There would be nothing moving near you, nothing close enough for you to see its motion clearly, to track it with your eyes, to watch it change position from moment to moment. You might see distant cosmic events, but they would be far away, abstract, not the immediate, visceral experience of watching something move through your nearby space. You would lose the experience of motion as a close, observable phenomenon. Everything that moves would do so at such a distance or such slow speed that motion itself would become theoretical rather than experiential, something you know is happening but cannot actually see happening in any immediate sense. You would no longer distinguish between motion and stillness. And eventually, this distinction would collapse entirely in your mind. Are you moving or are you still? You are drifting through space at some velocity relative to some reference frame, so in that sense you are moving. But relative to the space immediately around you, you are still floating without acceleration, without change in position relative to nearby nothingness. The question of whether you are moving or still would become unanswerable, not because you lack information, but because the question itself would cease to have meaning. Motion and stillness are relative concepts, and without clear reference points, without the ability to feel motion, without anything to move toward or away from in a time frame you can perceive, the distinction would dissolve. You would simply exist, and whether that existence includes motion or stillness would become irrelevant, a question from a different context, a different way of understanding the world that no longer applies to your situation. You would be beyond motion and stillness, in a state where both concepts have lost their grip on reality. You would never reach the edge of anything. Edges are boundaries, transitions from one type of space or condition to another. The edge of a table, where the solid surface becomes empty air. The edge of the ocean, where water meets land. The edge of a forest, where trees give way to field. Edges are places of change, and they structure our understanding of space, dividing it into regions with different properties. But the universe has no edges that you could reach. No boundaries, no transitions. Space simply continues indefinitely in all directions. You could drift for eternity and never reach an edge of the universe, never find a wall or barrier or limit. The observable universe has a boundary, yes, but it is not a physical edge, just a horizon beyond which light has not had time to reach us. And even if you crossed it, you would notice nothing, no change, no marker, just more space extending onward. You would exist in a realm without edges, and this would remove one of the fundamental ways humans structure their experience of space. Everything on Earth has edges, has limits, has boundaries that can be found and crossed. But not the universe. The universe is edgeless, boundaryless, infinite, or so large that infinity is indistinguishable from it. You would drift through a space that never ends, never changes, never offers any marker that you have gone from one region to another. You would drift through regions too empty to be called space. This seems contradictory, but space itself is usually defined as the emptiness between things. But if there are no things, if you drift into voids between galactic superclusters where there is almost nothing, no stars, no gas, no particles, just vacuum so pure and empty that it approaches the theoretical limits of emptiness, can it still be called space in any meaningful sense? Or is it something else, something less than space, a void so profound that even the concept of three-dimensional extension seems inadequate to describe it? You would pass through regions where the universe has so little content that it barely qualifies as a universe at all, just mathematical dimensions with almost no physical reality filling them. And the experience of drifting through such places would be indescribable because there would be nothing to experience, nothing to distinguish one cubic light year from another, just endless, featureless, empty nothing extending in all directions, darker than dark, emptier than empty, more absent than absence itself. You would exist without progress or decline, and we return to this truth one final time. You would not be moving toward anything or away from anything, not progressing toward a goal, not declining toward an end, just continuing moment after moment in an unchanging state. On Earth, life is narrative, a story with progression, with rising action and climax and resolution. But your existence would be non-narrative, a single note held indefinitely, a sentence that never reaches its period, a story that never advances past the opening scene. You would exist in a state of suspended animation, not physically but existentially. Nothing would happen to you. Nothing would develop or evolve or conclude. You would simply persist, and your persistence would mean nothing, accomplish nothing, lead nowhere. It would be existence in its most minimal form, stripped of all the things that make existence feel meaningful or purposeful or directed. Just raw continuation, unadorned, without justification or explanation or endpoint. You would drift forever with no final moment. There would be no day when you stop, no moment when your journey concludes, no ending to arrive at. Forever is not a very long time. It is not a time at all. It is the absence of temporal limit, the continuation without conclusion. And you would experience this not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality. Every moment would be followed by another moment, and that moment by another, and on without any last moment, without any final breath or ultimate thought or closing scene. Just continuation, endless continuation, the same awareness persisting through time without end. And perhaps, after unimaginable durations, you would come to a kind of peace with this. Not acceptance in the sense of being happy about it, but simply acknowledging that this is, what will be, what cannot be changed. You would stop waiting for it to end because you would understand, finally, that it will not end. You would stop hoping for change because you would understand that change is not coming. You would exist in a state beyond hope or despair, beyond desire or aversion, simply present, simply aware, simply continuing because that is what you do, what you are, what you will always be. You would exist without an ending. And this is the final truth, the last thing to understand about this journey that is not really a journey at all. Endings give meaning to beginnings. The fact that stories end makes their middles matter. The fact that lives end makes them precious. But you would have no ending and therefore, in a sense, no meaning in the narrative sense. You would be a story that never concludes, a song that never resolves, a question that is never answered. You would simply be forever without purpose or conclusion or resolution. Just existence, pure and terrible and eternal, stretching forward into a future that has no last page, no final word, no moment when the universe finally closes its eyes and says, "It is finished." And perhaps that is the most profound strangeness of all. Not the loneliness or the darkness or the loss of time's meaning, but this, that you would continue, that there would be no escape, no end, no mercy of mortality. That consciousness, your consciousness, would persist indefinitely, experiencing a reality so empty and unchanging that it barely qualifies as experience at all. You would be trapped in existence, not by walls or chains, but by the simple fact that you cannot stop being, cannot cease, cannot reach any conclusion. You would drift through the cosmos, through the eons, through the slow death of stars and the cooling of the universe, and you would remain, unchanging, unending, a single point of awareness in an increasingly cold and dark and empty universe, witnessing everything and nothing, mattering not at all, existing for no reason, with no purpose, just drifting forever without end. And that, finally, is what it would mean to drift through space without ever aging. Not adventure or exploration or transcendence, but something much stranger and much more terrible. An existence without context, without change, without meaning, without end. Just you, and the void, and the eternal, silent continuation of moments that never accumulate into anything more than themselves. Forever, and ever, without end.